Good morning, everyone. My name is Naphtali Offen, and I am a retired tobacco documents researcher from UCSF, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 20th Annual Tobacco and Other Industry Documents Workshop. And I'll be speaking about how we got the documents and a brief history and suggesting some uses that hopefully will be helpful to you in your work. This is the agenda. We're going to have 4 speakers in the morning, each a half an hour, with a couple of 15-minute breaks. And then in the afternoon, we will be demonstrating how to search for the documents and have some breakout sessions. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues who helped make this event possible. So I'm going to be speaking about how we acquire the documents, what's in the collection, and why they are valuable. In the 1990s, the National Association of Attorneys General sued the major tobacco companies to recover the expense for treating indigent smokers who were sick. The industry came up with a strategy to overwhelm the government and delivered truckloads of documents, hoping, I imagine, that it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. So they gave us enormous volumes of documents. 1998, with the help of Congress, the case was settled, and it's called the Master Settlement Agreement. These are the original signatories. The top 5 on the screen were the major tobacco companies at the time. There's since been some merging and rearrangement. And the 3 groups on the bottom were industry-wide lobbying groups that they all contributed to do the work of the industry. So here are the terms of the Master Settlement Agreement. There was $206 billion allocated to pay the states over the next 25 years. And thereafter, they would be reimbursed in perpetuity. However, this has to be looked at from in contrast to the $600 billion that are spent every year to treat sick smokers in the country and account for lost productivity. Also, the state legislatures controlled how that money was spent, and very little of it went to tobacco control or even to health issues. Much of it went to balancing the budget, and North Carolina even used some of the money, believe it or not, to modernize their tobacco plants. So BAT, British American Tobacco, one of the big companies, saw this as a fine, a tax, the cost of doing business. The money didn't mean that much to them. However, the industry-affiliated groups that I showed you on the previous slide were disbanded, and that was a good thing because they were very effective in promoting their product. There were ad restrictions that were also a victory for us. No more advertising tobacco on billboards, no more sports sponsorship, no more cartoons like Joe Camel that appealed to kids. And the American Legacy Foundation, Legacy, now known as the Truth Initiative, was funded. And that is a national organization, a foundation that's focus is on preventing kids from smoking. They contribute, they fund many projects around the country. And until we were doing this workshop online, they were a generous funder of this event. And I will be mentioning them throughout this talk. The most significant thing that happened from our perspective was the part of the settlement was a ruling that all of the documents that were presented for discovery had to be made public, had to be put on the internet. Initially, the documents were all by each tobacco company, housed on their own websites. It was very cumbersome. It was not user-friendly. Each interface was different. It was also time limited. And you could only search on metadata, just a few areas like who wrote the document, what time period, which company, but very little other information. So it was very cumbersome to search. So what happened is it made all the difference. The documents are now housed at UCSF. Truth helped pay for the copying of all the documents. So the advantages, they're housed in one site here at UCSF. They're available in perpetuity. They're not going to sundown. They're quite user-friendly and intuitive, which you either know or will learn today. And they're fully text searchable, which is extremely significant, especially for those of us who had to deal with these documents before that was the case. So what's in the collection? We have 14 million tobacco documents, which amounts to 92 million pages. We've got 8,000 audiovisual items, which I urge you to check out, which comprise altogether 46 separate collections. And in the time that the documents have been available, there have been over 1,000 peer-reviewed papers written that have relied heavily on the documents. So we're delighted about that. So here are some of the subjects that are in the documents. The customer research is quite interesting. The industry uses the term psychographic segmentation, which refers to slicing and dicing the population into the smallest components so they can target their advertising. So for example, they might target second generation, upwardly mobile Latina women to see exactly what the best messages to get them to buy their product would be. And that's quite fascinating to search the documents for specific groups. So why are they valuable? They're a glimpse into the workings of an entire industry, unprecedented. In their own words, we get to see what they're up to. And I'm going to be talking about these following 4 goals that we have in researching the documents. It helps us expose the industry lies and their tactics. It helps us identify their attempts to work against tobacco control. Front groups, we always want to know who's working on their behalf but not identifying themselves. And very important, it helps us reframe tobacco control. So why is this important? Exposing its bad behavior is feared by the industry. In the 1990s, there was an attempt to divest tobacco stocks from the portfolios of universities by advocates. It didn't have much of a difference on their bottom line, but in this document from the industry, they expressed their fear of being labeled a rogue and their concern of how that would affect them in the future. This is a very important document from 1969 by Brown and Williamson Executive, and it applies across the board to all industries, sadly. Doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the mind of the general public. It is also the means of establishing a controversy. So they knew that we had the facts on our side, and they just had to present alternative facts and confuse the public. And in 2019, this paper appeared, Distract, Delay, Disrupt, Examples of Manufactured Doubt from 5 Industries. So as I said, doubt is hugely important in all these corporations that care about their product and making money and disregard any of the health consequences of their activities. So now we are delighted that not only do we house the 46 collections from the tobacco industry, but we also have collections from other industries. Drug is pharmaceuticals. I'm going to give you an example now of the first paper that I wrote many years ago using many different documents that tell the story. And this helps us expose the industry's lies and tactics. Back in 1992, Philip Morris's ad agency recommended that they advertise in the gay press for the first time. This was a time when gay liberation had made some pretty good inroads, and a good chunk of the population was feeling rather casual about gay people being in their midst. Although there was still homophobia, I don't mean to downplay that. So the industry was a bit nervous, but they were told by their ad agency that this is a perfect audience, young, male, hip, fashionable, urban, and that Philip Morris, being the first one to enter this market, would own the market. The reaction to this event was that that Philip Morris was nervous. As I said, it was kind of a middle period where they wanted our business, but they were afraid of the reaction. So they were cautious and curious. The story broke in the Wall Street Journal. The tobacco industry, after being beaten back in its efforts to woo Blacks and women, are now pitching to homosexuals, another minority. Now, they wanted to be quiet about it, but the publisher of Genre, which was the magazine they chose for their first advertising, was so excited to get a Fortune 500 advertising campaign that they boasted about it, and it became a national story. And this is not true. This was the New York Post. New cigarettes aimed at gay smokers. Not quite the case. Don't look now, Marlboro Man, but you've got a brand new gay partner. So Philip Morris must have been very distressed by that, because they went out of their way with Marlboro Man to convey machismo. The gay community had different reactions. Lambda Legal, which is one of our preeminent legal organizations, said, this is no victory for gay rights. And The Advocate, a major newspaper, said, we don't get enough advertising, so we're in a beggar's position. However, others thought it was great, and the editor of and publisher of Genre said, a conservative American company fights discrimination against homosexuals. Not. And GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, which is the equivalent of the Anti-Defamation League in the Jewish community, said, went to bat for the industry. They got paid for it. They got a huge donation, and they were touting the industry's talking points. They say, obviously, we want people to make healthy choices, but people have to decide for themselves. GLAAD is basically the mouthpiece of the industry. That was very painful for me because personally, I was a founding board member of GLAAD when it was created in 1985. So that was a poor chapter in otherwise good work that they were doing. There was a stockholder who wrote to Philip Morris condemning them for getting into bed with the gay community. And they wrote back to him and said, we don't even know if there is a gay market. We're just going after style-conscious adults. So they were dissociating themselves. So what's the story here? PM wanted to own the gay market. However, they didn't want to be associated with it. So what can we learn from that? Philip Morris may not be the corporate ally that some gay people think it is. Destabilizing tobacco control was high on their list. They saw us as the anti-tobacco industry. This is a document called Fair Play, which outlines what they were up to. And we have felt many of these things. So the first thing was to study us and to learn what we're doing, to inform themselves about what's coming, and to build relationships with moderate organizations in our community with the attempt to exacerbate conflicts within our movement. And I will give you some examples of that in a few minutes, and to diminish funding to us and to attack our leadership. So what's the story here? It was a plan to counter the effectiveness of tobacco control. What it means is that the industry has ulterior motives when trying to form alliances with our groups. And what does it tell us? Under no circumstances should we be involved with the tobacco industry. And I will keep repeating that throughout this talk. Front groups. Back in 1984, Philip Morris executive said, the whole question of getting third-party assistance, front groups, is to give us clout, power, credibility, leverage, where we don't have it by ourselves. The industry was aware that they were on all favorability studies and scales. They were at the very bottom of American corporations. So they always were looking to put forth people and groups that they were presenting as neutral and not them. I want to give a shout out to the Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, which is one of the oldest and most effective tobacco control groups in the country. They've been responsible for many victories. And check out their website and see a list of front groups, which might be helpful to you if you're pushing legislation in your local area and want to make sure that anyone testifying against you is not a front group. Reframing tobacco control. My colleagues Libby Smith and Ruth Malone wrote an important paper, Thinking the Unthinkable, Why Philip Morris Considered Quitting. And these are some quotes from a Vice President, I think we all believe that our future lies outside tobacco and principally in the food business. And he said, if we're still having trouble after a couple of years, we should just get rid of tobacco. So what's the story here? Thank you. This is consideration by a top-level Philip Morris executive who entertained getting out of the tobacco business. So what it tells us is that if the industry can contemplate such a thing, so too should we tobacco control advocates. And in fact, that's what we're now doing. So quickly, here's some additional suggestions for how you might use the documents. I'll give you a quick example of each. In 2006, there was a racketeering trial against the tobacco industry brought by the government. It was a civil trial. And Judge Kessler found the tobacco industry were adjudicated racketeers for conspiring to deny the public the knowledge that they had that tobacco was deadly. And here, Judge Kessler is quoting from the documents. Here's some counter advertising. Project Scum was one of the most egregious documents in the collection. It's from R.J. Reynolds. It was an acronym for Subculture Urban Marketing. It was targeting, it was gay men in the Castro area in San Francisco and homeless men in the city's Tenderloin neighborhood. So clearly they wanted our business, but they were mocking us and being contemptuous. And the Truth Foundation published a couple of ads, a video ad and this print ad, in which they call attention to what they did to help educate the public and expose the industry. This is something you might be able to do based on the documents. We did a brochure to help educate the LGBT community about how the industry was coming after us. We distributed this widely and it was well received. My colleagues before me did a project studying tobacco industry targeting of the African American community. And my colleagues wrote a paper that documented how the vast majority of major African American organizations at the national level were taking money from the tobacco industry. And after they published their paper, there was news around the country about it. And it started a dialogue. There was a lot of pushback that they got because people in the community felt that we need the money and you're hurting the community for exposing this. But at this point, there's been a lot of progress made, which the dialogue was started by, in part, by this research. And one thing they did, which was marvelous, I think, they took the raw documents to focus groups and showed them to African American smokers and non-smokers, and they got to see just how the industry viewed them as targets, and they also got to see some of the racism that appeared in the documents. In 2009, the FDA was given limited authority over cigarettes, over tobacco products. It was very controversial among advocates because Philip Morris promoted it. My colleagues, Patricia McDaniel and Ruth Malone, wrote a paper about why Philip Morris was pursuing regulation of their industry. And the takeaway message is that they knew it was coming and they wanted to be at the table and in on the ground floor. And in fact, they've been very successful in thwarting a lot of things that should have been done a long time ago, like the regulation of menthol, which you will be hearing from my friend and colleague Carol McGruder after I speak. I want to mention that the campaign for tobacco-free kids, a moderate tobacco control organization, partnered with Philip Morris, while many of us opposed the legislation because we knew that anytime the industry gets involved, it goes their way. This document is one of the most well-known. It's by the actor Sylvester Stallone, and he's writing to Brown and Williamson, and he's saying, I will place your products in no less than 5 feature films as agreed upon, and you will pay me $500,000. So what this is telling us is that the industry knows that product placement, which is basically advertising in movies, sells tobacco. And any arguments that they make about artistic freedom is bogus. Choice. Do they not have the choice to stop selling a product that's killing 50% of their longtime users? So, you know what your area of interest is, and you look for it in the documents. And I suggest that you find corroboration elsewhere, because not everything you see in the documents is absolutely true. So look at these various other sources to make sure that you're telling the right story. And in conclusion, study the industry as it has studied us, and find out what they fear. Beat them with their own words, use their words against them, and spurn all industry overtures. The industry has enormous resources. They use it to frame the debate, sway public opinion, and influence policymakers. By using the documents to spotlight their lies, we hasten the end game, an end to the pandemic of tobacco-caused death and the elimination of the commercial tobacco industry as we know it. Thank you. Okay.
This is for all the attendees. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, please place them in the Q&A.
All right, I think I'm up next.
I think so, Carol. Thank you.
All righty. Okay, thank you, Naphtali. So hello, everyone. My name is Carol McGruder, and I am one of the very, very proud co-chairs of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. I'm seeing the tip of my head here, so let me use that. Okay, I think that's a little better. All righty. So I'm going to be talking to you today about the role, the very, very important role that tobacco industry documents have played in the work that we have been doing, which in my own opinion has been phenomenal. And so I want to share a little bit about who we are. So we are a group of African Americans who are based in California, but have been working nationally and internationally to bring down the tobacco industry cartel. It so happens that we were formed in 2008, largely in response to a lot of the budget cuts that we were facing in the state of California. And we wanted to keep priority populations as a priority in terms of our the strategies and the goals of our own California Tobacco Control Program. And subsequently, the Tobacco Control Act was signed by President Obama at that time in 2009. And so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So So we know that tobacco is one of the major drivers of health inequities and disparities, and we're the brunt of that, African Americans. A lot of times, I know we have, and I believe we have an international audience. So I'm going to try to add in some extra things for folks who might not be aware of it, who don't live in the United States. So it contributes to all of these things, these that we are constantly pouring resources and funding into, or not, but that we're living the consequences of them. Low birth weight babies, sudden infant death syndrome, asthma, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, environmental pollution, and our mental health as we deal with so many of the issues that have come to the forefront of this country during COVID, with some of the images that have gone around the world. So all those things are piled on all the other things that we're facing. And smoking and tobacco related diseases kill 45,000 Black folks in this country every year. And that's more than everything else combined that we think of as an issue. And this is one of the problems that we face here in the US, is that there's so many competing issues, and it was always so easy to push tobacco to the back burner and deal with the things that were more immediate and in our faces. And so this is a graph that I show to my own community in particular, because we get caught up on homicides, and officer-involved killings in these past few years have been at the forefront of many of the issues that we face. But when we put it on a graph, hands down, the tobacco deaths outweigh everything else. And while we cannot, we must work on the other issues that we face, we must equally work on these tobacco issues. And so, and of course, at the underbelly of all that is the tobacco industry cartel. So what we have been doing with our elected officials in our own community is that we want tobacco control issues to be in our top 5 priorities as a community, and to be in the top 5 priorities for the leaders and the government entities that are charged with improving our lives as American citizens here. So in 2009, when President Barack Obama signed the Tobacco Control Act, a smoker at that time, I believe, it was generally agreed that flavors hook children. This was before vaping and the e-cigarette epidemic that we're still living with. And all the flavors were taken out of combustible cigarettes at that time, except for menthol. So we had just been formed, and it really became a focus of our energy and our time from that day until this. So we mobilized ourselves with very little funding, and we set about seeing what we could do to change that and to have menthol taken off of the US market, as it has been in Canada and the European Union and Japan and other countries. But in America and the US, with the racial overlay that we have of everything here in this country, it became a concern that menthol cigarettes were what Black people preferred, and that we wanted, we wanted our menthol cigarettes. And that's literally some of the pushback that we're getting around taking these mentholated products off the market. So when President Obama signed the Tobacco Control Act, it was protecting American children, but it wasn't protecting the Black ones, because Black people are not born as adults with the Newport cigarette hanging out of their mouth. We are born as babies and children. We grow up, we have developmental stages as others. We become teenagers, we experiment with things. And the industry was there seeding these addictive products in our communities. And we're still living that seeding and that addiction that's been seeded into our communities up until present day. So who would protect our children? Who would protect these babies? Our Head Start, which is a program for low-income children. Who would protect these babies? And so we said we will work to protect our children and to break the cycle of addiction that we face with many, many other things that are going on. So we describe this as trickle-down public health policy, similar to trickle-down economics that we experienced with President Reagan back when I was a teenager, where you pass laws and policies that benefit those who can advocate and fight and protect themselves. And those at the bottom, some of the benefits might trickle down to them or not. And that is the way that we were implementing this public health policy in our country. So this is, and so now we're going to get into the role that tobacco industry documents have played, because they really are the foundation for a lot of the work that we do. And so there was talk some years ago that there's no new information in the documents, its day has come and go. And it's played a significant role in our fight in this country to be protected. And there's still things to be culled in there. So at the end of my presentation, I have some things that I'd like you to look out for when you're doing your practicum later on in the morning. So this is an abstract that we actually submitted in Singapore at the World Conference on Tobacco Health. Early on, we began to take our plight outside of the US. I'm a very international person. And so this abstract is called The Least of These, African Americans, Tobacco Control and US Policy. And it just documented using research done by Dr. Valerie Yerger, Dr. Ruth Malone at UCSF, that was really seminal research papers, as I said, that have helped us in all that we do and continue to help us until this day in documenting and being able to frame just the notorious bad behavior of the tobacco industry cartel and their racist and pernicious and persistent targeting of the African American community. So this abstract was taken, partly the research under there was racialized geography. So it documented using the tobacco industry's own documents how all major tobacco companies perniciously and persistently targeted African Americans. They created urban programs, and urban, meant Black, African American programs that included the co-optation of Black leadership, heavy media campaigns, giving tobacco and cigarettes away to children as young as 9 years old. And this resulted in what we see today, which is over 80% of African Americans who smoke use a mentholated tobacco product. 90% of our youth initiate with menthol cigarettes. And addiction is about science and opportunity. So we see this, the issue of menthol as a human rights and a social justice issue.
Carol, sorry to interrupt you. The Spanish interpreters are asking if you could slow your pace just a bit.
Okay, I know I speak very fast, so I will slow down, and I have done interpreting. So I know how difficult it is when you have people that go on and on. So I'll take some breaths and pauses when I'm speaking. And if you need to remind me again, please do so. So this is Marie Evans. She is our poster girl for what happened in every single major urban African American city in this country. And that the industry came in and gave her physically in her hand Newport cigarettes when she was 9 years old. At the time when they gave her the cigarettes, she was a child and she used to trade them for candy. But at the age of 13, by then she had tried them and she was addicted, dead at 54. Her family sued and actually were awarded an initial judgment of $152 million, of which they received $79 million. So this woman, if she were alive, she would be my age. And so I love this slide, reminds me of the harm that has been done to my community in particular, of the role of a Black grandmother in our community, the role that I play in my family, in my community, for the work that I do for the world with this work. And I have a lot of living to do. And so when someone is taken at that young age, it causes irreparable intergenerational harm. And that is what we want to lay at the feet of the tobacco industry cartel. So healthy communities facilitate the individual's ability to make healthy choices. So when the tobacco industry comes into our communities where there are liquor stores and cigarette outlets, and that becomes the norm, then that's what children like Marie Evans do when they get to be a teenager, is that they do what everyone else is doing. So a lot of our work is around community norm change. And a big part of that is getting the tobacco industry out of our community. So this is the research paper from the tobacco industry documents that I talked about, racialized geography, and Dr. Valerie Yerger and Ruth Malone and the team there at UCSF called the tobacco industry documents, and they put together this seminal paper that really has helped us. So you saw it came out in 2007. So soon that'll be 20 years ago, but it's very, very important to the work that we do. This is a film called Addiction Incorporated, and most of the major tobacco control players are featured. And it just really documents, also using tobacco industry documents, how the tobacco industry researched the addictiveness of nicotine, how they enhanced the formula to make it more addictive. And it's a very fascinating film that uses animation that really explains this whole scenario, this whole universe that we find ourselves in. And I highly recommend that people watch this film. And so a lot of this film is based on tobacco industry document research. So chemistry plus addiction plus access to people equals addiction. That's the formula. And that's the formula that the industry has used. And I liken it to the movie The Godfather, one of my favorite films. And the premise of that movie, the premise of that movie is that there were families that wanted to bring in drugs into the United States, and The Godfather did not. And when they made the peace, at this meeting, I'm not going to try to play this video, but the Don that stood up said, we'll leave this with the coloreds because they have no soul. And that's what the industry was doing with us back in those days, is that they really so heavily targeted us because, and we had such little defense from our own institutions that should have been defending us while we were fighting at the time for civil rights and other things that we were preoccupied with. And so this is what we see today. So these are the priorities that I talk about that distract us from dealing with tobacco control and tobacco-induced diseases. And this is why we call ourselves giant slayers, because we ended up suing our own government, the FDA. Let me get to that slide. We've sued the FDA because everything, all the information is there, and the FDA has yet to move on taking these products off the market. And because of that lawsuit, the FDA this year they began the rulemaking process, and they are supposed to this year in 2023 take these products off the U.S. market, along with little cigars and cigarillos. So your Swisher Sweets, your Backwoods, your Black and Milds, those are supposed to come off of the U.S. market this year. But in the interim, because we know that there's so much interference on all levels of government, and that the higher up you go in our government, the more the tobacco industry cartel is able to manipulate and interfere. So in this lawsuit that we had against the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, it's us, Action on Smoking and Health, the American Medical Association, and the National Medical Association. And the National Medical Association are African-American, our Black doctors who formed their own association back in the day when they were not allowed to join the AMA. And so we want, the AMA actually helped bring in the NMA. And so when you can imagine the breadth of a problem when the nation's doctors have to sue the government to take a deadly product off the market. So that's the fight against menthol. So also in this fight, when we're talking about giant slayers, so we fight the tobacco industry cartel, we fight our own government, we fight sometimes our public health colleagues, some of whom made the
algunos de los cuales en ocasiones
made the concession,
hacen la concesión de
to leave menthol in the market initially in the first place. I think our Spanish track is on our track here, so I don't know if that's supposed to be on a separate channel or not. So we know that African Americans are, that it's like smoke doesn't stay in the smoking section. So the things that have been done are not done for our benefit, also harm everyone else. And so we are used as a tool to blunt public health policy for all, along with African Americans. So another thing that the industry does is that they cynically exploit the legitimate grievances of the African American community. Issues around racism, police brutality, and officer-involved killings. And so in the research paper, Smoking with the Enemy, that research
en los estudios que se han hecho fumando
how
con
the tobacco industry cartel systematically cultivated our leadership, our media. And so in those relationships and that strategy still is in force today. It still exists today. So there are many changes. But with our National Newspaper Publishers Association, who actually also sued the FDA or the government to get some settlement money from a different case that where the tobacco industry are federally adjudicated racketeers. But the buying of our media and that influence that's documented in the
Y esa
tobacco
influencia que
industry
está
documents
documentada
is very important. I
es
don't
muy
know if we can
importante.
take the
No sé
Spanish
si
off because
podemos.
it's
I think, I
yeah.
think they accidentally came on here. I'm gonna
Okay.
try to situate that now. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I have about 15 more minutes. So this case here, so that police brutality is an issue. And one of the things that our detractors are the folks who, many of whom are taking money from the tobacco industry cartel is that they make the case that if we take menthol off the market, when we have more laws around and policies around tobacco control, that those laws will be unequally enforced on African Americans and will result in more police involved interactions. The very well-known case of George Floyd, that store he was going to in Minneapolis was one of the few stores that sold menthol cigarettes, because we've done work there, and they had the policy of they were restricting where those products could be sold. So the tie-in of enforcement and cigarettes, there is a tie-in, but that doesn't mean that these things will not happen if we leave the biggest predator of Black people, which is the tobacco industry cartel, if we leave those products on the market. And our position is that we must work on both of those things at the same time in tandem. This is where we get to the quid pro quo for the Black press. So this is another tobacco industry document paper that came out of UCSF, where they document quid pro quo, which was, we give you this and you give us that. So their cultivation of our media, and this man, Dr. Ben Chavis, is actually the head of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is the equivalent of the Black Associated Press. So this is showing how we use the tobacco industry documents to tie in, even today, the actions of the actors who are taking money from the industry to espouse their rhetoric. So this was actually a forum that was held in New York last year. I actually attended it. And for those who aren't familiar with our country, in New York and New Jersey, for about a decade, there was a stop and frisk program where African American and Latino men could just be stopped on the street without any reason why, and they could be physically searched, they could be stopped and frisked. And so the tobacco industry then is putting this forth, that is the cigarette menthol ban, the new stop and frisk. And this is an example of them stoking our legitimate fears, our legitimate concerns and grievances to stop public policy that will benefit Black people. So in our being able then to go back and to use the research paper quid pro quo to be able to put that in front of our elected officials, to be able to put that in front of our other African American organizations who are supporting the work that we do, has been very important and very crucial in our fight to get mentholated tobacco products off of the U.S. market. So this is where this is the case where the U.S. and the tobacco-free kids sued the tobacco industry cartel, and the remedy for that was that the tobacco industry had to apologize to the American people, and they had to place ads in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Black papers, which were the vector for Black people, were left out of that. And so while we totally agreed that the Black papers, because that's where the tobacco industry had targeted us through magazines like Jet and Ebony and our own Black newspapers, were left out. But the interesting thing was that the same people who are taking money in one hand from the industry and not giving us the information as a Black community were now using our documentation, our research that came from tobacco industry documents to make their case that they needed to be a part of the remedy. And I hope that's clear for people. I'm not confusing you. So on the one hand, they're taking money from the #1 killer of Black people. And then on the other hand, they're wanting to be included in the lawsuit, in the payments from the industry, to place ads to apologize to Black folks about what they're doing. And so in this settlement, there was no real particular apology that was directed to menthol users or to African Americans. It was just the American people in general. So that was an example of how we sometimes must fight our own public health colleagues, because they're not using their weight to fight for all of us and to address the special needs that we have that have been well documented in their own tobacco industry documents, that we need a little extra remedy. We need more help than some of the other folks who are able to defend themselves a little bit better. So that was a very interesting. So in with that, we still keep in mind who our true enemy is, which is the tobacco industry cartel. And much like Naphtali spoke a little bit earlier, that targeting for people, communities that are poor, that don't see themselves reflected. So when we start to get a little advertising, it means a little bit more to us because we've been denied and we've been marginalized in so many ways. So these are some of this is the team who signed the checks when we talk about smoking with the enemy and racialized geography, that targeting. These are the wonderful people who are behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz. So these are the people pulling the strings, and these are the people, while we have to deal with our own people, we must also address the source. And so this is the source. And when we talk about health promoting behaviors, when we're trying to get our folks to walk and eat vegetables and de-stress, the underbelly of that glacier is the tobacco industry cartel. And so the documents have been very effective in helping us to put a spotlight on that and to highlight that that's where the solution is in dealing with the underbelly there. So this is back to these federally adjudicated racketeers and the support of tobacco industry documents in making the case against them. And this is that remedy that I talked about, these slides. So this is a little out of order. So this is an issue of social injustice. The tobacco industry, they target everyone, and that's what they're good at. You know, Naphtali talked about the targeting of the LGBTQ community, but they're particularly pernicious with Black folks, and we have so many other issues to deal with. And I think that's why it's been so harmful for our community, and why we see such great disparities that obviously still exist today and are exacerbated by many other things. So this research is if the ban had been passed in 2010, the lives that would have been saved to 2050. So now we're, more than 10 years in, nothing's been done. And what I want to highlight is that targeting, how effective it is, because even if only 30% of the population changed, the overall lives that would have been saved would be 633,000, that bottom number. And of that, a third would be African Americans, 237,000. Yet we are 10% of the population. So statistically, that number should be 63,000 rather than 237,000. So that really demonstrates the effectiveness of this pernicious, relentless targeting that still continues. This is more recent research, and so that's a picture of our Dr. Valerie Yerger, who's a UCSF professor and one of our co-founding members of the council, and who was one of the original tobacco industry document researchers. So this is documenting the consequences of a match made in hell. So the harm caused by menthol smoking to African Americans from 1980 to 2018. And this is the consequences of a match made in hell, that we have 1.5 million new African-American smokers, 157,000 smoking-related premature deaths, and 1.5 million life years lost among African-Americans. And so their research was running different scenarios, and they couldn't even believe it themselves, the catastrophic consequences of this match made in hell. And so we are working to get these products off the market. So this is the Smoking with the Enemy paper that I talked to you about, and which was still going on. Their playbook is still very much valid of how they got in, but it is changing. There are many groups now who are standing up to what's going on with the industry. And I'm going to get to those. So Delta Sigma Theta sorority was one of the first major African-American organizations to pass a resolution supporting the FDA taking menthol off the market. They went back again and they operationalized it, allowing their local state and local state branches to get involved in the efforts that are going on. And that's been a game changer for us. Also, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is the oldest civil rights organization in the United States of America, and had before taken money from the tobacco industry. And since that time, the industry has tried to bring them back into the fold, and they have stuck. So I'm just very proud of that one. So that was in 2016, and they have participated in some of our passing of our local laws and legislation to get the products off the market. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. In California, we passed a law in 2020 taking menthol off the market. The industry came in and put it on the ballot, a referendum in our state. You can collect signatures. We fought for that. So we passed that last year, November, and then they've come out with new products. And so these products are illegal in our eyes. We're still working with our Attorney General. This is a play for non-Californians on Obamacare's California covered California. So California, we've got you covered. These are the new Camel menthol cigarettes. This is cool. And if you look at this ad, this is a throwback to the ads of the 70s targeting us with kind of the cool black ads. This is cool. This is their still bold, still smooth. And I added in still killing Black folks. So it has us playing whack-a-mole with the industry, and they're more well equipped to just keep morphing into different things. And so we're going to talk about the end game, but that's another conversation. So this is where you can help me. I was in Cuba last year, November, for my birthday, and the women there threw me a birthday party. And so there were Cuban women and there were African-American women. And we all went around the circle to say what we did. And when I said what I did, there was one particular woman who was so enthusiastic about it. And I was like, how does she even know? And it turned out that she was retired, a little older than me, and she had done the ads for Coke during the same time when ads like this were being put together. And so what she informed me was that those were white stylists who came in, who dressed Black people, who showed us how to be Black, what was a Black ad, and how the models and the people loved to work with her because she brought in African-American stylists. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you when you're looking around today is if you can see what PR firms ran those ads and marketing campaigns back in the 70s. If you see any actual contracts, if you can see any of the names of the Black models who posed for those ads that were so effective, because some of those people are still alive and we would like to reach out to them. And then also tobacco industry research on breast and other cancers. Someone is going to be presenting on breast cancer, but my mom passed from breast cancer. So we're very much wanting to put a spotlight on industry knowledge and actions around breast cancer and other forms of cancer as well. So I'm going to end there. And I think that I have about 2 minutes to go. So if there's some questions that people have or comments. I hope people are still there. It's awfully quiet. So I'm wondering if something happened.
Again, if people have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Thank you. Not a question, but a comment. Just want to say this is really wonderful work.
Thank you. And our website is savingblacklives.org. You're all welcome to get on there and get on our listserv so you can get information. Many exciting things are happening this year. Keep you informed.
Someone wrote, thanks for such a nice presentation. Tobacco industry is really outrageous. Someone wrote, I didn't know AMA was discriminatory too.
at the time. They've been our great partners with us, but I must tell the history. They've
Okay,
been great partners with us during this lawsuit and added just a considerable amount of expertise with their own legal folks. And I try to tell the history of, history is important. And even I'm seeing the history that I've lived, that it's changed and reinterpreted. So we need to document the realities of the histories and the changes that have come about, which are wonderful.